My neighbor put my dead husband's photo on a donation page, raised $11,000 in his name, and never told me a single thing about it. I found out from a stranger at the grocery store who wanted to offer condolences for a fundraiser I'd never heard of. My name is Perpetua Renlo, and my husband, Ojoel, died 14 months ago in a workplace accident at the shipping yard he'd managed for 9 years. Grief does strange things to how you experience time. 14 months felt both like yesterday and like a different lifetime, and I was still, most days, learning how to exist inside a house that used to have 2 people in it. The woman at the grocery store, someone I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood, squeezed my arm and said, "I just want you to know we all donated." Marguerite's fundraiser really moved the whole street. I had no idea what she meant. I asked her to explain, and what she described didn't line up with anything I recognized. A GoFundMe titled, "Help Perpetua Rebuild After Losing Her Husband Ojoel," complete with a photo of him in his work uniform. A photo I recognized instantly because I had taken it myself, the summer before he died. I'd never given anyone permission to use that photo. I'd never started a fundraiser. I'd never even mentioned needing financial help. Ojoel's life insurance and workers' compensation settlement had, difficult as it was to navigate, left me stable. I went home and searched his name directly. The page was still active. $11,200 raised from 63 neighbors, co-workers, and people I'd never met, all believing they were helping a grieving widow who had asked for nothing. The organizer's name at the bottom of the page was Marguerite Osterhaven, my next-door neighbor of 6 years. I sat in my car outside the grocery store for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself drive home, reading through the fundraiser page over and over on my phone. The description Marguerite had written was detailed, specific, and almost entirely fabricated. It claimed I'd lost our house, that Ojoel's employer had denied any compensation, that I was struggling to afford basic groceries while grieving alone. None of it was true. Ojoel's workplace accident settlement had been substantial. I still lived in our house. I had, if anything, been financially cautious to the point of overcorrecting, terrified of somehow mismanaging what felt like the last tangible thing connecting me to him. I didn't confront Marguerite immediately. I drove straight to my sister's house instead, because I needed someone to tell me I wasn't misunderstanding something obvious. My sister, Autoline, read through the page in silence, her face shifting from confusion to something harder. "She used his work photo," she said. "The one you took. How would she even have access to that?" That question sat with me the whole drive home. Marguerite and I were friendly neighbors, not close friends. We exchanged mail that got misdelivered, waved from our respective driveways, occasionally shared extra vegetables from our gardens. She wasn't someone I'd have shared personal photos with directly. Then I remembered. 6 weeks after Ojoel died, I'd posted that exact photo in a private Facebook group for spouses of workplace accident victims, a small support community I'd found through a grief counselor. Marguerite wasn't in that group, but her daughter, Wisteria, who'd recently lost her own husband in an unrelated accident, was. I called Wisteria's number, my hands unsteady, and asked her directly whether she remembered seeing that photo anywhere, whether she'd shared it with her mother. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything before she said a word. "I'm so sorry," Wisteria said, her voice cracking. I showed her a few posts from the group, months ago, just to help her understand what I was going through. "She saw your photo and asked who you were." I told her. I didn't think she'd do anything with it. I really didn't know about the fundraiser until my aunt mentioned it last week. I believed her. Wisteria sounded genuinely horrified, and I didn't think she'd orchestrated anything. But it meant Marguerite had taken a private, vulnerable photo, shared in a closed support group specifically for grieving spouses, and used it to construct an entire fictional narrative about my finances, without a single conversation with me first. I spent the next 2 days documenting everything before I said anything to her directly. Screenshots of the fundraiser page, the fabricated details about losing our house, the donor list, 63 names, some of whom I recognized as our actual neighbors, people who genuinely believed they were helping me survive a crisis that didn't exist. I also discovered something that made the whole situation feel less like a misguided gesture and more calculated. The fundraiser's payout information, the bank account linked to receive the donations, wasn't listed under my name or even under a memorial fund structure. It was linked directly to Marguerite's personal account, with a note buried in the fine print explaining that funds would be distributed to Perpetua on her behalf to reduce financial burden during a difficult time. which meant, functionally, Marguerite had access to $11,200 donated in my dead husband's name, sitting in her own bank account, with no legal obligation to give me a single cent of it unless she chose to. I called a lawyer that same afternoon. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ines Callender who specialized in fraud and consumer protection cases, listened to everything without interrupting once. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "This isn't just tasteless. This is textbook charity fraud, using your husband's identity and a fabricated financial hardship story to solicit donations that were routed to a third party's personal account. Most crowdfunding platforms have explicit policies against exactly this." She helped me file a formal fraud report directly with the fundraising platform first, attaching evidence that I hadn't authorized the campaign, that the described hardship was false, and that I had no relationship to the linked bank account. The platform froze the remaining undistributed funds within 48 hours and opened their own internal investigation. Then Ines helped me draft something else, a public statement, my own words, that I could post directly to correct the record for the 63 people who donated in good faith, believing they were helping a grieving widow survive an invented crisis. I want to be honest about something here. Part of me wrestled with whether exposing Marguerite publicly was necessary, or whether a quiet legal resolution would have been enough. But I kept thinking about those 63 names. Neighbors. Coworkers of Ojel's who genuinely grieved him too. People who deserved to know the truth about where their money had actually gone, rather than being left to assume I'd simply never thanked them. I posted my statement to the neighborhood community page the same day the platform froze the funds. I didn't accuse Marguerite by name in the initial post. I simply corrected the record, explained I'd never authorized any fundraiser, never given permission for Ojel's photo to be used, and that I was financially stable and hadn't asked anyone for help. The comments underneath filled with confusion, then anger, within hours. Someone had already put together that the organizer's name matched my next-door neighbor. Marguerite showed up at my door within the hour, her face a mix of panic and forced calm. "Can we talk about this privately?" she said, "before it turns into something ugly?" "It's already something ugly," I told her, not inviting her inside. "You've had $11,000 sitting in your account for weeks, raised in my dead husband's name, and the first time you're trying to talk to me about it is after I posted publicly. Not before you started it. Not while it was live for a month." Now, she tried explaining herself, that she'd seen how hard grief was for Wisteria, that she'd wanted to help, that she'd always meant to give me the money eventually. She just hadn't found the right moment to bring it up without it feeling awkward. "There's no version of this where using someone's dead husband's photo without permission and inventing a financial crisis they never had is a well-meaning gesture," I said. "You didn't ask me if I needed help. You decided I did, invented a story to justify it, and put the money somewhere I had no access to. That's not generosity. That's theft with a sympathetic narrative attached." She didn't have an answer for that. The platform's fraud investigation concluded 8 days later. Their findings matched everything Ines had already flagged: unauthorized use of my likeness and my husband's identity, fabricated hardship claims, and funds directed to an account with no legal connection to the stated beneficiary. Under their policies, they issued full refunds to every donor who requested one and froze Marguerite's account from further platform use permanently. Of the 63 donors, 41 chose to redirect their contribution instead of requesting a refund, asking, once they understood the truth, if I'd be willing to accept the money directly or donate it to something real in Ojel's memory. I chose the second option. I set up an actual memorial fund, verified and transparent, supporting families of workplace accident victims navigating the exact kind of confusing, overwhelming aftermath I'd lived through myself. The memorial fund is called the Ojel Runlow Foundation. It's been running for 9 months now, small but real, and every dollar in it is traceable, verified, and used exactly the way it says it will be. We've helped 4 families cover funeral costs their insurance didn't fully absorb, and 1 widow, a woman I'd never met before her husband died on a construction site 2 towns over, navigate the same confusing paperwork maze I'd nearly drowned in 14 months earlier. Marguerite and I don't speak anymore. She moved out of the neighborhood about 5 months after everything came out, unable, I think, to keep living next door to a mistake that public. I don't feel triumphant about that. I feel, mostly, like something that should have been simple, a neighbor grieving, another neighbor genuinely wanting to help, got twisted into something that cost 63 people their trust in a system meant to do good. And cost me weeks of energy I didn't have to spare, energy that should have gone toward actually grieving my husband instead of proving I hadn't asked to be rescued. I still have the photo she used, the one I took of Ojal in his work uniform, smiling at something just off camera I can't quite remember now. It sits on my dresser, properly this time, not attached to a fundraiser I never authorized, not narrating a version of my life that wasn't true. So here's what I keep asking myself. If someone used a loved one's memory and identity to raise money without your permission, even if some small part of their intention started out as wanting to help, does that intention matter at all once the money ends up in their own account instead of yours? Or is that just theft, dressed up in the language of generosity?